The second part of our day today, happy to kick off this broader discussion on issues of gender equality, empowerment, following on the conversation that Aimee and I started here. And I honestly can't imagine a more qualified group of women to be having this conversation with. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to Google. I thought rather than trying to have everyone introduce themselves, I'll run through and just give a quick introduction of who we have here on stage. All of their bios are available online at makemyvoicematter.org. So if you want to read any more about them or hear more about their work, that's the place you can check it out. So we've obviously already met Aimee here, Aimee Mullins, with a few labels: actress, athlete, advocate, but none really, just Aimee. We already talked
Thank you.
To her left, we have Hala Kazim. Hala is a counselor, artist, author, and the founder of Journey to Change, which is a new concept that she's been working on that provides people with support, advice, and help through tailored services and walking and hiking destination tours. She features regularly as a guest speaker on challenges facing women, particularly in the UAE. So Hala, so glad to have you here today. Thanks for traveling to be with us.
Thank you.
To her, the other side of her, I'm going to not do the directions correctly for the stage directions. We have Oisika Chakrabarti, and she is the Senior Communications and Media Specialist at the UN Women. UN Women is dedicated to gender equity and empowerment, and she has been with the United Nations for 11 years, guiding media partnerships, engagement, public information around the UN. And prior to that was herself a filmmaker and broadcast journalist in South Asia, so obviously brings all of those qualifications to her role. Down the line from her, we have Arlette Nkurayija. Arlette is the president of Women and Children Embassy Foundation, based in Canada, where she advocates and focuses on issues of African women, both in Africa as well as people who have immigrated to Canada and helping them to resettle. She's obviously an expert in that because she herself was born in Rwanda, and after the 1994 genocide, chose a path to creating a better future. She moved to Italy, Montreal, fluency in 5 languages. She's now able to use her law degree and is currently working as a lawyer for Talk Enterprises and Talk Marketing. Arlette, thank you for being here. And then finally on the end, we have Melissa Gordon. Melissa is the director of the LGBTQ Gender and Reproductive Justice Project at the ACLU of Southern California. She has been with the ACLU for quite some time, and I was very excited to meet her because she led New York's successful effort to pass marriage equality statute and then served as the co-counsel on the Windsor versus United States case, which eventually was the case that the Supreme Court held in determining that the Defense of Marriage Act was unconstitutional. So Melissa, a pleasure to have you here today. Well, let's get this conversation started with a relatively broad question for someone who I think thinks a lot about issues globally. Oisika, could you just talk a little bit about kind of what do we mean by gender equality? And when we think about where we are today in the world, what progress still needs to be made, and why are we talking about this issue still today?
Sure. That's a great question. And firstly, thank you for hosting this panel. This is a great conversation to have, and of course, a topic very, very close to my heart and all our hearts, I guess. So what do we mean by gender equality? We mean a world where men and women are equal, whether it's politics, whether it's sports, whether it's economy, whether it's access to healthcare, in all aspects of life. And for some people, let's say for my 4-year-old daughter, she thinks gender equality is a given. It is something that she completely believes that she's in no way different from my 6-year-old son, because she's not treated differently, and she doesn't believe she's has anything up the road where she will be treated differently. She's having a ball, imagining everything is equal. And as a parent, I hate to think of that day when it will suddenly click in her head that it's not so, that gender inequality is entrenched in our society no matter where you look. Economy, politics, sports, access to healthcare, the amount of leaders we have. And it's not to say that we haven't had progress. There has been a lot of progress over the years. Today, there are many more women, girls in primary education than ever before in the world. There are many more women in politics today than ever before in the world. and there are many more women in the economy. They're working and they're in paid employment. But the progress that has happened over the last few decades is too slow, uneven, and just not enough. I say that because today, 1 in 3 women are going to be subject to violence in their lifetimes. Across the world, there are only 25 women who are prime ministers and presidents in the corporate sector. Since we're in the Silicon Valley, we can't refute the fact that there are only 25 women CEOs in the Fortune 500 companies. There is a 24% wage difference between men and women. And even as we speak right now, women are dying. Women are dying every single day. 800 women die every single day just trying to give life, as in childbirth, from preventable diseases. That is unacceptable. And that is why we say gender inequality is still entrenched, and every single day we have to work towards changing that.
Melissa, I think it would be interesting to hear, I think sometimes here in the US we think, oh, we've made so much progress, and these are perhaps issues that are more prevalent in other parts of the world. Could you talk a little bit about the US perspective, as and at the ACLU, some of the things that you all really are focused on right now?
Sure. It's such a big question, too, because there's so many things. And one of the things I have the privilege of working on for the ACLU is our gender equity work. And I guess, much like Oisika, there has been tremendous progress, but there are areas where there are still just structural differences and problems. So I'll give you my top 6. The first I would say, and it has a few components, is really the continuing structural barriers, stereotypes, and unconscious bias that really still hold women back in the workplace and translates into less economic power. This is a global problem, but also a problem in the United States. And there's a lot of pieces to it. We're far from the time, largely far from the time where women are officially treated differently or shut out of jobs altogether in the United States. Though I will note the ACLU actually does have such a case. We're actually still challenging the exclusion of women from combat positions in the U.S. military. So it does still happen. But largely now what you really see is unequal employment opportunity, and in particular, a real difference between who enters the workforce and who elevates to management and to leadership. And it's really about stereotypes, assumption about women's abilities and interests, what an ideal worker or success really looks like. In our mind, when we close our eyes, we think of a man for a lot of these things. And it's been proven that traits that really make men powerful and strong and respected in the workplace are the very same traits that make women less likable and subject actually to poor self evaluations in the workplace. So there's that. There's continuing systemic pay inequity, as Oisika noted, in the United States. A big thing for us that we're working on is, and I'm only still on the employment part, but is the fact that in the United States we literally have no supports for working parents. And that is not just a female issue, that is a male and female issue. But the cultural reality in our country is that the burden of that falls disproportionately to women, and we have no paid family leave. In fact, only 12% of workers in the entire country have access to paid family leave. I was just looking up the statistics again today and was horrified when I read again that 33% of new mothers take 0 time whatsoever after their child is born. And that's terrible as a cultural reality. 43 million workers in the United States don't even get paid sick days to take care of themselves or their child when they're ill. And we have no system of affordable daycare. So that's just a few of the things in the employment sector. Just a couple more things that we work on. I agree that the gender gap in politics is a tremendous problem, and it exists in the United States and not just other countries that we often think we're better than. Not true. There's a tremendous amount of gender-based violence and harassment. I just heard, last week that the domestic violence calls are the single largest category of calls that the police in the United States get every year. Women are losing their ability to make personal decisions about whether and when to have a child at alarming rates in the United States. Politicians remain completely obsessed with interfering with that highly personal decision about whether to have a child or have an abortion, and that is something we're seeing all the time. We're seeing girls are still often getting education that's full of gender stereotypes. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't also point out problems with our criminal justice system and the gender impact that has. In the United States, our criminal justice system over-incarcerates women for low-level, non-violent, petty, often petty, poverty-related offenses, and at much higher rates, actually, than men. And this just creates a continuing cycle of economic disempowerment, and it separates families. There's 1.3 million children living in the United States right now with incarcerated mothers. So these are just a few of the things we think need fixing.
It sounds like you'll have a job for a while, Melissa.
Yes, for better or worse, that is true.
I think one of the really interesting things that we have represented in this panel are just these different perspectives on this issue. Hala, I think your perspective would be particularly interesting. How do you think about empowerment in the context particularly of the UAE and the Middle East, and how might perception of that context perhaps differ from reality in your experience?
First, thank you for having me. Well, I think one of the main things I want to clarify is the media has given a very negative idea to the world about the Arab world. And I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that the reality in some countries are very different than what is really shown. The gender equality is one of the main things now. UAE has, I think 6 months back, Sheikh Mohammed has, Al Maktoum has announced a law that there is gender equality between men and women at work, in the society, and all. And does it really apply in reality? Well, it's around the world when we really think. If I will be very frank about it, it's a man's world. And that's reality is. And I think we women did that. We have a part of that, giving them so much power. Now, it's nothing wrong. We are not in a competition. I always say, it's not like I have to be equal like everything. There are things I know I'm not able to do like a man, and a man cannot do like a woman. But there are a lot of things that we can do the same. Like in our countries, the salaries, for example, we're equal. In America, it's 50%. So if a man takes $10,000 a month, exact the same $10,000 for a woman. It doesn't matter the age or whatever. Or, it's very much equal in that. Positions. Mostly I would talk about, yes, Arab world, but you have to understand that Arab world are not as everybody sees it, it's one country. It's so many different than, the Egypt is thousands of years of history. Well, when we come to UAE, it's we have done the United Arab Emirates in 42 years only. And whatever we're doing, I think it's a miracle. Lately, Sheikh Mohammed, and they have made a law that a divorced woman, a single woman, gets a free land like a man. And we do get, all of us. I mean, I'm an example of having a free land and an interest-free loan for 25 years. Now, this goes to all the nationals of our country. So different countries have different laws. And I'm not saying we are living in a la-la land. We do have. There's no perfect country. But we're trying. And I think I would give that at least to our country, that we are trying our best, or we're doing our best to at least take care of some shortcomings of what reality is. So I think, women's empowerment is getting stronger and stronger. I think people like all of us, there are thousands of us that can do some changes. And if I can, I'm an example of a woman from UAE, from Dubai. And I'm sitting here. And that shows that we are given the chance to do a lot of things. So it's, I don't want to compare Arab countries because I always say, like, when an Egyptian grandmother was going to the university, my grandmother was illiterate. It's so different, I cannot compare. So, but we're catching up, and I think it's around the world, everybody's doing their best.
Yeah. Hala, you touched on something that I think is interesting and something that we've seen more conversation about this year, in particular with the He for She campaign, which is the role of men in this movement. You mentioned, women in some ways have put ourselves in this position, or men have put us in this position, and I think it's interesting as we talk about empowerment. Aimee and I earlier spoke about self-empowerment versus being empowered by some other entity. Open to anyone's thoughts, I think, really, but just what is the role and should be the role of men in this movement? And then I think that the next question is, what should we as women be doing more to support each other in achieving the goals that we all have for gender equality? Anyone want to? Arlette?
I will say just to start where you are. And that means everyone, it doesn't have to be a big speech or some panel like we're doing right now. It helps, but I think it's better to just keep it simple and start where you are and look around you, look at the woman around you, and it could be a little conversation. It could be to ask how they are. It could be to just understand what they are going through. And in that way, small things that make a difference in every woman's life. And to be able to tell them that they matter. And then if you can go and do bigger things like education, talking about it, then that's okay too. But I think sometimes we think that we just need to do things, and we are like thinking, I should do this, I will do this, and it doesn't materialize because you are thinking and you're planning. But you can just start and do something small but effective.
Just to add on to that, and I completely resonate with what Arlette said. So you mentioned the He for She campaign. So that was an initiative that came from UN Women, the campaign itself. Last year, one of our Goodwill ambassadors, Emma Watson, the supremely talented actress, she launched this He for She campaign, which is exactly what Arlette was saying. It's a call to men and boys to engage, not through an organized movement, but in their everyday. I mean, as a father, as a brother, as a son, as a supervisor at work, at an artist who's doing an exhibition. So just engage in your everyday life. I mean, to bring up your children on a foundation of equality. That's what every father can do. To stand up for discrimination against your colleagues when you see that in your office. So it was a way to make every man and boy across the world sort of stand up and take a pledge and say, okay, so I'm going to do this. I am going to make sure that the women and the girls around me are not subjected to discrimination.
I think, it's, if we talk about how do we do it, it's from inside. You have to believe that you can. A woman should believe in herself. And I think one of the very main things to help this is when you raise your children. I have 5 sons, and they have no issue with women to be even better than them or equal to them. So I think it all starts with us, not really from outside.
I would echo that, Hala. I think that in terms of it, I think for all of us, it's to become aware of where we have little prejudices or we act in discriminatory ways without even realizing it, I think is it's incredible to sort of wake up and understand that even if you think you are, as progressive as you think you might be, there's always a place where you're holding on to a pattern that is probably outdated. It doesn't serve you anymore, and it definitely doesn't serve the person who is being boxed or limited or categorized in a limiting way because of that. So I think the most exciting thing about that He for She campaign and similar awareness campaigns about it are that, when feminism started, there was a component of it that I think necessarily was rooted in anger at a sense of injustice, and not just a sense of injustice, but real experienced injustice. And now that we're a few generations on, I think the idea that to be a feminist is to want equal treatment of the sexes, all of them.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, did you want to add something? Okay. Hala, you mentioned women in violence, and I think Oisika, you mentioned some of the numbers there, and I think for people, women especially, but anyone who's in those challenging situations, finding empowerment in those really tough moments, people experiencing daily violence or abuse. What messages and how have you thought about, or in your work as you're all interacting potentially with people in those situations, how do you think about people there who are in that really low place of subjugation, helping them to find moments of empowerment? What advice would you have?
It is to go back to every single person as an individual. Everyone is unique, and it will be pretentious to think that because you have an experience or you have been through so much that it's going to help someone else. It could, but it's not. So it has to be always about the other person. And it has always to be also about you, because when I will give an example. I am a survivor of genocide, and I really don't like to say that about myself, because that's how people see me, as a survivor. But I feel like I am a human being. What happens was hard. It was a situation that I didn't cause, but that helped me now. When it was happening, I couldn't get it. And if someone would have come then and told me, because they went through something, it will help me, I will have not resonated then. So I feel like every time someone needs whatever they need, help, inspiration, you can always go from where you are and tell them your story, and tell it in a way that it's true to you. And sometimes it's going to resonate with them, sometimes not. But you have to understand that it's not about you, it's about them. And if you are able to help someone, you really have to remember that the uniqueness has to come through from them, not from you. But sometimes you need also to be practical, because there is some situation when needs active action. And I'm thinking of women in my work that I come across that are very sick, and you need to treat the physical disease first to be able to have that conversation. So I think as I said before, to start where you are is the most important things, and to see what's going on, not to feel like you have, of course you have to make a difference, but in someone other's life.
Sorry. I was just going to add that was very powerful, Arlette. I think the thing that I like to try to remind people in that situation is that no matter how powerless they feel in a particular situation or in that particular moment, to know that they still have power and they still have ownership over themselves, and that they are, very simply, they are not alone. Often it can help to talk to others, but unfortunately we live in a world where over 1 million women are sexually assaulted every year, and myself also as a survivor of some form of sexual violence, I think that it's important to say that, to own that, and to tell people that it's very hard, but there is another side. You get through to the other side, and there can be an enormous amount of power on the other side, and that you're not alone.
I think, to me, what I really would always say to any woman, to learn to love herself. And I think that's where we don't know. I think we abuse ourselves, and we don't take care of ourselves because we're programmed that we should always do something for someone. And I think if you really learn to love yourself, like loving yourself, it doesn't mean you're selfish. It means you can give people more because you take care of yourself. When I meet people with problems, they get puzzled. What do you mean I love yourself? Of course I love myself. And I'm like, okay, let's talk. Then in the end she says, I know now I don't. And I say, loving is not a handbag. It's not a trip. It's how you take care of well-being. And that's all my company or my program, I would say, is all about. Taking care of yourself in this journey of life. Mm. And when you know how to take care of your well-being, emotionally, physically, spiritually, intellectually, everything. And I'm not saying going to be perfect. None of us are perfect. There are no perfection. We will not be human. But at least you have the stability of living a good life. Then you really can put this person with anyone, anywhere. And they can do good because they're good to themselves.
I think this programming, we've all touched on this, it starts very, very young. I know that I've become very aware now that my friends and peer group are starting to become parents, that I don't say to a little girl, oh, you're so beautiful. That will not be the first thing I say to her. I will find, it's a little rule for myself, because I find it interesting to hear the things that were said to me, or I would easily say, if I was babysitting, you say things to girls that you don't say to boys, in the sense of be sweet, smile. These things start from a very young age, where it's about being palatable. And I know from my experience as an athlete, every year, a number of the greatest female athletes in the world gather in New York City for the Women's Sports Foundation, which Billie Jean King, who's a wonderful advocate in many areas, founded in the 70s, and we host, and the athletes do their own dinner the night before, like at a bowling alley kind of thing, really not competitive, right? But we get together and we go around the room first, and it's sort of the opportunity for the rookies, the people who've never been to that dinner, to introduce themselves. And it's extraordinary how people, we're talking about Olympic and world record setting athletes, or professional athletes, and how we've been taught how to dumb it down, to not be threatening. So it's become a little ritual at this dinner to be ridiculous. Because it would start by saying, yeah, I play softball. And I was like, oh, okay. And then that's what the rookie says. And the next person says, well, I set 3 world records. And then the rookie goes, well, actually, I do have the record for the most. It's become like, in this safe environment, can you be wildly celebratory of yourself and not have it equate to a derogatory feeling of shame, or you're not being humble, or exactly that you can, and it is sometimes these little steps of that. It just happened for me in the bathroom here at Google. A woman said to me that she was, we were talking about sports, and she said that she was doing Olympic weightlifting. And then she spent the next 5 minutes telling me, well, but for fun, well, more for fun, not just for fun because you have to work at it, but I don't really do it the way, and it was, and I listened to her, and I said at the end, I said, if you were a guy, you wouldn't have said any of that. You'd have just said, yeah, I do Olympic weightlifting.
And be very proud.
And that's it, own it, not have to couch it so that you could, make it more palatable for me. I think it's amazing. It's something that I become aware of because I do it too. We all do it. And I just think that becoming aware of and having a little, having little reminders and, to ourselves and to our friends, I think is just how we do start to make that change.
Mm-hmm. I think we brought up in the Cinderella syndrome that we have to always wait for someone, or we won't be complete. Are programmed in a way that you don't ask for much because you're not supposed to. You should, in different culture, a woman should not raise her voice or laugh loud, or because it's not proper.
I want to touch on just one of the themes. This is a really interesting kind of interplay, the conversation we're having between really personal choices that people make and then the structure in which those choices kind of manifest, and the interplay that I think we're in a lot as women. You feel empowered one day, and then maybe you bump up against a decision being made about a pay scale or a decision about leadership that doesn't go your way, and all of a sudden that's a step back, that's a setback. It does seem like, and a couple of you touched on the leadership imbalance, that there's some things that could be done by getting more women into those leadership decision-making positions such that those norms and cultures can start to shift from a much higher level. How do you think about the right ways of going about that? I know, Melissa, you're working hard on this in the film industry right now with directors and producers. I know Aimee is also working in a different vein in that way. So obviously that's one particular industry, but we see this across government, across corporate America, all the stats that Oisika started us with. How does that play into this conversation?
Sure. Well, I'll start and try to be very brief about it, because your question also, I think, relates to the last question and what we were all saying about sort of what we're taught so early. So I have been recently relatively obsessed about gender bias in Hollywood, and particularly looking at women directors. And a lot of people sort of ask me, like, why is this something the ACLU is paying attention to? Why is this a civil liberties problem? And I think this conversation is actually the explanation of why. One, it's a huge leadership position in Hollywood, but most importantly, it has, the TV and film are two of our most important, cultural products. And the fact that literally women are essentially excluded from directing big budget, studio feature films, and are seriously underrepresented in directing television. It's not just a civil rights problem, because, note to Hollywood, you do have to comply with civil rights laws. You're not exempt, even though the culture is otherwise. What we see on those screens has a tremendous cultural impact, and that's one of the reasons we're devoting so much time and energy to this, because our biggest cultural product is overwhelmingly being made by men, the stories are male stories told from a male eye. Women are depicted through a male eye. And I'm not saying, there's plenty of feminist, film and TV makers out there. But studies have shown when you have more women behind the camera, not only are more women depicted, but the way in which they're depicted. And the reduction in stereotypes, the more speaking lines, literally, that women have, it's tremendously important. So a lot of people think, like, why are you doing that? That's one of the reasons. So we look at industries where women really are effectively shut out, from leadership. And I guess the last thing I'd say about that, only because I'd be remiss because I'm sitting in Google, most of our very powerful industries here in the United States do have tremendous gender bias problems, and tech is, as I'm sure many of you know, one of them. And when you were saying leadership positions, unfortunately, the stat I read recently is only 9% of senior management positions in Silicon Valley are held by women. And we have to start examining the disconnect between the equality that we have at the educational stage. Women are generally in college and even in graduate school, graduating at equal rates, but somehow when you look at those leadership positions, the numbers drop dramatically, and we need to start working on that.
Oisika,
yeah, absolutely. And UN Women also works on this area of media because there is this huge challenge, as Melissa was saying, and we work in the newsrooms trying to expand the dialogue on media. But speaking about leadership as a whole, I think the challenge is here in the US, but it's also a challenge across the world, where what's considered the cohort of how many people you need in parliament to move towards a different law is 30%. And most countries haven't got anywhere close. United States is 75th on that scale, and it has about 20%, whereas Rwanda has 67%. So Rwanda is one of those countries which came after the reconstruction, where women became leaders because the men were not there, and in government, in politics, and everything. But I also want to come back a little bit to the last question about choice and self-identification and empowerment. But what do you do when there are no services to turn to? Across the world, I might be, as domestic violence survivor, I might think this is dangerous, and it's dangerous for me and my children to stay in this house. But where do I go? It's not as if a lot, and I think that also comes from what Aimee was saying earlier, how you're brought up. For a person like me, I would know that I have a job, or I would know that I have a father's household where they would say, just come back. He's abusive, come back. It's fine. But most people don't have that luxury of choice. So what do? They look for an NGO or a shelter to go to, and there are none. So when there are more women leaders, they also look for these kind of services. They try to move policy towards having more shelters, of having a place where domestic violence survivors can go. So in India, where I'm from, there is a whole democracy movement happening at the grassroots level. And the national parliament, no, there are not many women in politics, and we are a very long way to go to get to the 30% I was talking about. And the 30% is a benchmark that was talked about 20 years back at the Beijing conference. So, that's what I was saying. The progress is too slow. But at the grassroots level, at the sarpanch level, what we call the village council, there is about 1 billion. There is a huge movement where women are becoming leaders. And what are they looking for? They're looking for the water should be close to the household so that women don't have to walk for hours trying to get water. They're looking for a primary school in their village so that little girls and little boys can go to school in a sustained basis, not just go one day and then drop out the next day. So when women become leaders, they're also looking for societal change and not just cosmetic changes many of the time. So we do need more women in leadership here in the STEM industry, in politics, in government, everywhere.
So I think we are close to the time that we should be wrapping this up, but we could obviously keep this conversation going for many hours. I think just it would be great to get some final thoughts from some of you on what change you think is actually possible in our lifetime on this issue. I think we've talked a little bit about progress that's been made, and sitting here in Silicon Valley, we're always at the nexus of the future, and thinking about what with all of the energy that we have and all of the leadership roles that people have taken, what change do we really think could be possible in this lifetime?
I feel like everyone turned this way. Oh my goodness, so much pressure. I feel like I'm talking too much. I'll just say, I always sound like a cynic on these panels, but I'm actually truly an idealist. I wouldn't be able to kind of wake up and do what I do every day if I wasn't. I really think, and this is not necessarily just through suing people, it's not the only thing the ACLU does, but I feel confident that, and I'll only speak from a US perspective at the moment, because I don't feel qualified to speak otherwise, I feel like we can get, I don't remember the time period you said, but I think some of the changes we need to make in the workplace are attainable. I don't think, we're not in a cultural way, going to erase, eons of the way we view gender roles. We're not going to eliminate unconscious bias, tomorrow. But I think we can make practical changes in the workplace that neutralize people's unconscious bias in the way that we conduct hiring, in the way that we evaluate candidates for jobs, in the way that we structure our workplaces to be more, not only more supportive of working families, but moving towards a culture, as Google does espouse, of kind of treating workers as whole people. That is something that is like a radical, important gender equality idea as well, and very important. And I think if we seriously devoted time to doing that, and thought about things like family needs and pay equity and the needs that workers have outside of work, I think we could come a long way.
To me, I think removing limitations one by one, because there are so many, and it's a matter of just taking one at a time. And when you asked me the question before, I was, after everyone spoke, thinking about the labeling of people and how you see someone and you just want to define that person. And I think I was thinking when also Aimee was speaking about when you see a girl and you want to say something, and most of the time is about beauty or physics, attributes, and then I remember when someone that is very important to me told me once, because you are talking about labeling women, and he said that you are priceless. And it was so, to me, it was empowering, and I'm sharing because when I heard that, it wasn't about and then it resonates because it's not about what we do, how much we own. It's just being ourselves. And when you are yourself, you can go and ask that price that it's fair or not, but to be able to remove limitation, to be able to see yourself and be true to yourself, I think it's the way to go to start changing and empowering one person at a time.
I think, and not just because I work at UN Women, but I'm very optimistic about change. I think the very fact that we're having this discussion, decades back, gender equality wasn't on the public agenda. It wasn't in the private agenda. But now we're talking about it. We're all talking about it. So I think that's a huge change that has happened over the years. And then the other part of this movement, disorganized movement, unconscious movement, is that all of us can be part of it. If 10 people from this room go and talk to 10 people and say, guess what? I was at a Google and I was listening to this talk about gender equality. Is it a question mark or should it be a given? Can we do it in our household? Everybody can be part of this movement. And those 10 people talk to 10 other people. So, it's like little drops, but that can create a whole change. Just changing that conversation can have a huge impact whether in your household or in the community or society. But structurally also there are problems, and that can only change when laws change, implementation happens, and when also attitudinally people change their attitudes and mindsets. For example, it's 95 years since this country got women got the right to vote in this country? Isn't it time for a woman president? It's a matter of changing attitudes that has to happen for society to change. But I think there's a lot of cause for optimism.
Well, for me, I always believe you should be an example of a change. And people can listen to so many things, and if they don't see it, it's just talk. And I talk about it personally from what I have done. I have changed so much through so many years, from a little girl in Dubai to a depressed, very depressed woman, to a very different journey of self-discovering and bringing Hala back, and then looking at things and changing what's inside of me. Now, I think if every woman talks from her heart and acts from her heart, we are not fighting with men. We are not in a race with men. We are working with men. I can't live without a man. A man cannot live without a woman. They are my sons. I have my father. I have a brothers. So I wish we stop, who takes more? I have to take your place. You have to take. I think there are plenty of places for all of us. And I think if they see it in you, if they see the change in you, in your mind, in your behavior, and that's what I did in Journey Through Change, telling women, take care of yourself, take care of your inner self inside of you. Feel that you are worth it. You don't need to prove to anybody. I always say it's so good to have a man in my life, but that's a bonus. There are so many things in life to do. And yes, some people say it's easy for me to say because I have a husband and I have my sons and all. But I worked for them. I worked to get that. But if it didn't, I wish women are raised that to be fulfilled and a man to add to it. And I think I will repeat and repeat. It all starts with action. If every woman teaches herself first, her children, her community, by example, by spreading the word, by awareness, I truly believe, because I did it in my community. I did it. I get hundreds and thousands of messages from women saying, because we see how you did it, we are doing it. Because you're an example of an action woman. That's why when they gave me the question, I said, I don't want to prepare. I just want to talk from my heart. Because I really want to show what's inside of me. And I think we are really, I'm talking about Arab women. I have never seen, I've done more than 20 trips, and I've done in this program for 4 years. The most strongest woman I have ever seen. And I'm not just saying that. And I know people think, oh, we are indulged and we have a very comfortable life. Yes, we do. I mean, we do. What can I do? I say I don't want. You can't say that. So if I've been given a good life, I'm grateful. But what I have seen in my trips from women that is living a very comfortable life, to stay in 3 stars or bed and breakfast and carrying their own suitcases and walking 20 kilometers a day in Camino de Santiago. That's where it all started for me in Spain. I think really, really the change, it could be amazing for all of us, for the new generation. I mean, who would have thought that all these different women from all over the countries can meet and say what they can say and exchange? We will never have a perfect life, but we will do our best to have a good life.
I support and agree with what all of these incredible women have said. I think I'm astounded by how much change we can see in our own lifetimes. And I think just yesterday, flying here, the person in front of me, in the aisle in front of me, was watching the most recent Mad Max film. And I was excited. I mean, I didn't put my headphones on, I didn't know the sound, but I just watched for actually longer than I thought I would. Charlize Theron being the lead of the film with a prosthetic hand, and absolutely carrying an action movie, and absolutely it being, I don't know, just I remember I just thought about, wow, from Terminator and RoboCop to this. It's absolutely happening in our lifetime, and I'm sure we can say this across the board when it comes to identity with transgendered persons. I mean, it's the rate at which progress is happening, and I think acceptance and awareness to acceptance is getting faster and faster. But with regards to women's empowerment and equality, it'll happen a lot faster with men also make it their priority. I think men make fantastic feminists.
Let's all thank our panelists for being here.
Okay, now the excitement begins. Aubrey Logan is going to sing our hit song, My Voice Matters. And as I said before, these charities will receive the benefit of your generosity. So please download the song, okay? And there are T-shirts there too, if you're interested. But here's Aubrey Logan's My Voice Matter, written by Nick Milo, Aubrey Logan, and Gary Catona.
1, 2, 3.
I can feel it. It's alive. Through the raging cacophony, survive. There's a voice in me, unmistakably, to make somebody know their worth, to set somebody free, to tell her she can change the world. I know I've got to see my voice matters, my voice matters. Feel the heart is waking, feel the world is waiting. My voice matters, your voice matters to me. It's the sound we've listened for forever. There's a burning in my soul. There's a story that's waiting to be told. Oh, they may not see the fire yet, but they can smell the smoke. Well, they may not read the book right now, but I know something spoke. My voice matters, my voice matters. Feel the heart is waking, feel the world is waiting. My voice matters, your voice matters to me. It's the sound we've listened for forever. Baby, sing it out, unafraid. All the worst things that can happen won't undo the mark you'll make. I dare you to say, my voice matters, my voice matters. It's the sound we've listened for forever. Hear the sound, we've wanted this forever.